welcome to Mindfulness of Doom, a weekly podcast about life, peaceful living, and existential dread. You're not lost. Everyone's faking it, and the purpose of life is, enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Mindfulness of Doom. I am your host, Corey Hardacre, and your co-host...
And I am Brian Lemmerman.
So, welcome back to the show. If you've returning from the first episode, welcome. Thank you very much. You guys are amazing and beautiful, and we love you. Brian, where's your head at?
I have a cat. I have two cats, but one of the cats, the big white fluffy one, his name is Dipstick. And he can be quite a dipstick sometimes. I got a call from Naomi this afternoon, and she goes, "Hey, I need you to come home. Dipstick just completely diarrheaed all over the bedroom, and it's on the bed, and it's outside. Yeah, the cat shat everywhere.
Okay.
And it just was like runny leakage.
And she's got white fur, so it's just... Yeah. It's a mess.
It was a disaster, and Naomi managed to get the cat outside, trapped in the patio for a little while until I got home. So I got home, I picked up the cat. The cat was a mess. I went into the shower with the cat. I showered with a poopy cat. I'm just imagining your sense of calm, and you're as a mindfulness coach, I can just see you with a wet, angry diarrhea cat. No, the best part was my initial reaction when I received the phone call. When Naomi says, I need you to come home, Dipstick shat all over the bedroom, and it's a mess, and I can't do this alone. And I go,
I know that sigh. that's a familiar sound.
Yeah, that was...
I've had to do one of those on an occasion or two.
And so using mindfulness in this situation... the thoughts run through the head, how terrible it's going to be, and I'm probably going to get poop on myself, and I'm going to have to take a shower with a cat, and I'm probably going to get clawed and scratched, and all of these things are running through my mind, and I'm going, well, this is my responsibility, and this is the life that I choose. So I allowed myself to sigh. I felt all of that yucky stuff, and then I packed up my things, I went home, and I took care of it, and she was doing laundry, I was bathing the cat, and everything turned out fine.
This is good. I'm excited to hear a story about real-life mindfulness in action, particularly one that involves a measure of humility.
For sure. No, because when you're standing naked in a shower holding a cat in your arms that is covered in its own feces... It does something to you. There is a level of humility that enters the equation.
It's one of those moments where you just wish the end would come sooner. And that's really what we're all here about on Mindfulness of Doom, is paying attention to the end game, because it's coming. And we're all going to die, so let's cut the small talk and get right to it.
Yeah, let's get right to it.
Okay. So... last week we had a good episode talking about mindfulness, and this week we're going to be talking about doom. And a good friend of ours, Blake Harvey, asked, was this Doom the metal band, the metal subgenre, Doom the video game, or Doom the existential crisis?
Yeah, and obviously the Doom that we're talking about is the third option. It is the
worst of the three.
Yes, by far the hardest to explain, the least desirable to experience, and overall, it's going to happen. Like the first two may not happen to you, but the third one will eventually happen. And the perspective that we're coming from is, well, how are you going to go out, and how are you going to live until it does?
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting to think about, like, the end of all things, because it's as our current understanding of science goes, it's going to happen. As we mentioned last episode, the heat death of the universe is currently one of the leading theories on how the universe will end. It began with the Big Bang and rapid cosmic inflation, and it seems to be the case that all the galaxies are going to move farther and farther away from each other until they can no longer see each other, past the cosmic horizon, and then after a trillion years, or even more, the last black hole will radiate out all its energy, and all matter will return back to energy, and the universe will experience its heat death, which is not a comforting thought, but that's kind of the universe going out with a whimper.
Yeah, it is. We were just talking about all of these doomsday theories and people who believe that, the rapture and the apocalypse and all of these really...
Yeah, what do you think about these people who predict the end of the world?
It's tough to say. It's a romantic vision, of course, that we're going to be engulfed in fire and brimstone, and there's going to be massive explosions and fissures in the Earth's crust, and we're going to fall in and get crushed and burned and blasted to that place that people don't want to go. But at the same time, you think about what the most likely scenario is. The universe is just going to fizzle out, and it's going to be very anticlimactic.
Probably. By the way, if you have any anxieties about the end of the world, this may not be the podcast for you.
And on that token, if you do have anxiety about the end of the world, this may also be the podcast for you.
Yes, because the only way to really get over those fears is to engage with them and to think about it and to overcome them and realize that the end is important in all things. And if you try to live life always running from the inevitable, you're just going to spend your life running instead of enjoying it for what it is. So this is kind of the nature of this podcast, is to try to tackle these ideas and talk about what mindfulness is, what doom is, and
really, what's the appropriate way to live while we're here?
I mean, the end of the species is probably going to happen a lot sooner than the end of the universe. The end game on our planet is the sun expanding and finally cooking away Earth's atmosphere, which is going to happen in several billion years.
And was it that the sun would expand to such an extent that it would engulf the planet Earth, or it would just get really close?
They're not really sure.
Yeah. Our friends over at They Laboratories are still doing the research, and we expect to know soon. And when we find out, we will let you know.
Yeah, we'll get back to you on that. Hopefully before the end of the species. But yeah, it's going to happen. And whether or not we become a cosmic faring species going world to world, trying to postpone the inevitable,
Mars 2030.
It remains to be seen. But in all likelihood, we'll probably not.
Yeah.
Not with current technologies, obviously.
We've gotten the question over and over again, hey, so you're starting a podcast on mindfulness, and why doom? Why the doom route? And we wanted to use today's episode as an opportunity to field some questions, yes, and also to explain a little bit about our perspective. And we were talking a little bit about the importance of living life like it's a unique experience, like it's something here that is very special. It's a limited time opportunity, the offer of a lifetime, and here you are experiencing it. And
you're listening to a podcast while working and doing whatever else that you're doing.
Which is likely not what you want to be doing.
But you're doing it.
You're doing it.
And you're alive while you're doing it. And appreciating that fact is tremendously helpful.
So if you're hearing us right now, I invite you just to take a breath and realize where you are in your seat, in your body, in space. Just notice what's around you. And I invite you to really appreciate your surroundings and everything that you're experiencing right now, because guess what? This is it.
Yeah, you're alive right now, and you may believe in reincarnation. You may believe that there's an afterlife, but if you engage with those ideas long enough, you might have doubts about those things. So
yeah, and I prefer to cross that bridge when we get to it,
right,
so to speak.
Yeah, but let's not waste life and death. So let's try to engage with both of them. And I think that a lot of people's idea of doom is the end, or the collapse of civilization, or the end of their life. I think people are afraid. There's lots of death taboos. There's lots of fear of dying, and particularly like funerals. especially in the West and in America, tend to be a pretty morbid and sad thing, and that's fine. How you choose to mourn is up to you, but certain cultures, they celebrate death a little bit more. In New Orleans, in Nolans, they used to go to the cemeteries with in a big procession with a band on the back of a big flatbed truck, and they were playing really sad, somber music on the way to the burial when they actually lower the casket into the ground, and everybody's crying and upset, and as they should be. But once they bury the body, when they return to the church, the music that the band plays is very uplifting and exciting, and then it becomes a celebration of death. Once you have your time to mourn, and then you move on. And you celebrate the life that happened, because life doesn't happen without death. It's a necessary component of living.
It's built into the design of the game.
Exactly.
I mean, what's the point in playing the game if you're not going to experience the end of it?
Well, some games don't have an end. Like Minecraft is something that's really popular right now, and that's a game that doesn't have an end state.
Yeah.
And you can just kind of play it ad nauseum forever, and you never really get to the end. Like World of Warcraft or some of those big MMORPG games, they don't have a real victory condition. The point isn't to become the ultimate god character. But in some games you can do that, like let's say like a Grand Theft Auto, like a big world map game. You can have all the cheats and turn them on, and then it's really fun for a little while to be invincible and to have all the weapons and be able to sustain everything the game can throw at you. But when you do that long enough, you get bored.
Yeah, it's true. I was thinking back. There are two tangents I want to go down. First one is thinking back to my days of playing NES and Super Nintendo, and my brother and I used to play Super Mario Brothers and Super Mario World frequently, and we had the Game Genie. And my God, the Game Genie was the coolest device in the world, because you would plug it in. It came with a little booklet, and you would pop in some codes. And it would alter your experience of the game. It would turn your Mario into like a god Mario. And my favorite cheat code was the Mega Jump, where you could just lift off of the top of the screen and bound over anything, and then you could be invincible throughout every level if you wanted to. And you're right, it was really cool to do that for a little while, and then eventually you kind of get bored, and you're like, well, the game is kind of easy now. I really don't feel like playing it anymore.
The philosopher Alan Watts from the 70s, who's I'm kind of a fanboy of. He's not the only philosopher out there, of course, and he gets a lot of things wrong. But one of the things that he would always kind of harp on was this idea of, like, if you had full control of anything you could dream about, and you could, before you went to bed, you could say, all right, I want to dream about this tonight. Not just lucid dreaming, but beyond that, actually predicting what you were going to experience before it happened, and not as a reaction to. And, you take that line of thought and you think, well, at first it'd be really fun. You get to, I want to dream about being a superhero. And the next night you decide, I want to be, one of the survivors on the Titanic and have a bit of a scare, but then still make it. And then later you just keep doing that over and over again until you get to the point where, like, okay, there's nothing really exciting because you know what's going to happen, and you have all the power in the world to change your dreams. And then eventually you would just decide that you wanted a surprise, and that you would overcome this desire to know everything, and you would dream to live the life that you're having now, with surprises and all the pains and sufferings of not knowing what's going to happen, and that ends up being a far more enjoyable experience, despite the suffering, despite the existential dread that is caused by that style of living.
Yeah, well, the existential dread, I think, is caused primarily by us forgetting over and over again that in the context of this whole God and dream theory, that we put ourselves here to have this experience. And every time we forget and we think that all the surprises are taking place outside of us and they're beyond our control, that existential dread comes back.
Yeah, and I think it's important to also remember that, or rather, I like what Carl Sagan said about the the scientist who wrote the book Cosmos said that we're all made of star stuff, like all the particles and atoms and molecules in not the molecules, but the atoms in your body. We're all created by an exploding star that when it reformed our sun and all the planets, and everything that's in us and in the planets and in the sun all came from the same place. And you are part of the universe. You are the universe. You literally are the universe looking back in at itself. And oftentimes we feel so separated and anxious, and we feel alone because you are one perspective, one that no one else can share with you. People can't share that same unique position and view, and that tends to be a bit lonely for people. And I think when we forget that and we get too wrapped up in our own stories, we forget the underlying truth of it, which is that this is it. You're swimming in the sun's atmosphere right now. You're alive, and that's all you get. And that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and if I could just bring this back to video games for a second, it's almost as though we are the creators of the game Tetris. And then after we created the game Tetris, this is a fun, simple game. We've got all these shapes that appear at random, and we'll try to fit them together.
I'm pretty sure you didn't create Tetris.
Well, let's pretend we did for a second, right? Just for the context of this conversation.
I think the guy that invented Tetris didn't actually end up getting any royalties for it.
Yeah, which is very unfortunate. And we'll verify that and post the facts in our show notes. But pretend for a moment that we invented the game Tetris, and then we decided, look, I'm going to play the game now. And we got so wrapped up in the playing of the game with all of its surprises and all of the random objects and items that appear, and trying to fit things to be neurotically perfect all of the time, and then it eventually gets faster and faster, and you have to lose at some point.
There's no win condition in Tetris.
There is no win condition.
You just play as long as you can until you give up and die.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And it's remarkably fun.
And it's a great metaphor for life.
Really.
Yeah. And then you also there's those people who just decide, you know what, screw this game, and they just force quit.
Yeah, but
the rage quit.
My favorite thing about Tetris was when they came out with a 2-player version of it. There's a 2-player mode in Tetris. Right. Where you can play on the same screen, or you can connect the Game Boys or whatever device you're using. The point is, you get to play the game with somebody else, which makes the game that you're going to lose eventually that much more fun. And you were talking about loneliness. When people feel separated and isolated and caught up in their own stories, and then eventually this whole game of life ends, and we have a choice that we can either remain alone and separate ourselves from the rest of humanity and stay wrapped up in our own stories and belief systems and all of that, or we can choose to make friends and collaborate and have a really good time with the other beings, the other human beings that are going through the same experience. Exactly. And the sense of community, I think, is one of the key factors in making this whole thing enjoyable. There's a line that I use very frequently. It's like, it's no fun to play alone.
Well, even when you do play alone, you can enjoy it, but you still are defining your own experience by what other people are not doing.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, that's not me. I don't like that. I don't like going out to football games and being in part of the, huge crowd, and that is a definition based in opposites, and telling myself, I'm not like that. I'm not like that. But you still need those other people to help define that characteristic of you, even if you're more the single player type person.
Yeah, we do. We use references to define our own identities, and the fact of the matter is, how we show up in life is how we show up for other people, and the distinction to be of service for others is a very profound choice to make in life, because when we're giving to other people and receiving from other people, many people say that is the way to a fulfilled life.
Yeah, and to take it a little bit darker just for a moment, since this is the Mindfulness of Doom podcast, that I think we mentioned last week about suicide, and one of the interesting things that I learned about it back when I was an undergrad was that in American society, African Americans have a higher suicide rate than anybody else in the country, but the rates of suicides went down when times got worse, when economically the country was faring poorer. But when times were better, the suicide rates went up, which is interesting because you would think that suicide rates go, when things get bad, people start to feel more depressed and more alone and more morbid. But the truth is, it's actually the opposite, is that when things are bad, people bond together. They look out for each other more. They reach out and check in on you more. Recently in the news, we've had a lot of natural disasters in this country. Puerto Rico is still suffering, and they still need lots of help. And we're here in Miami, and we didn't get hit nearly as bad, but we still had a lot of damage to trees and property. And I was without power for 2 weeks. But neighbors who I had not even spoke to yet, came by and said, "Hey, do you need power? I got power. If you need to come over and charge your phone or just chill in the AC a bit." And I was like, "Wow, that's amazing." When things are bad, people bond together and they reach out more. When things are good, we stop checking in on each other. We start to think, "Oh, everybody's good. And then those few of us who don't have the best mental health, those of us who are going through those rough patches, they start to feel more alone and more ostracized because they look out and they see everyone else doing well, and it makes them feel even more detached from the community. So, there's not much we can do about that, but what we can do about that is if you are one of those people who hasn't reached out to your friends in a while, do so. And that might be just the thing that you need to help make somebody else feel better. And if you're a person who feels bad, remember that you won't feel bad all the time, that you can't have a roller coaster that only goes up. And sometimes you're going to be up, sometimes you're going to be down, and there's lots of people out there to help you.
Yeah, and as we begin to wrap up this episode, thinking about as mindfulness teachers, we're here to create the conditions for world peace. And as you just mentioned, when things are going well, people get more depressed, and they suicide rates go up, and people suffer more. But as things are doing very poorly in the world, people bond together and they support each other, and it kind of makes you think, like, all of this pursuit of internal peace and world peace, does it really help? Is that going to make things better? Would it be better to create strife and therefore create the conditions for more community, which then has the entire life experience be better for people? And it's almost as though this whole thing is one big cosmic joke. I mean, is it? It's like, who invented this?
Well, my short answer to, are we really just looking for peace? No. No. You have to have death to have life. There has to be suffering in the world and able to understand what joy is. And that's part of the process. And I don't think that, life eats life. Like, we don't eat rocks. We don't eat things that aren't alive. Like, even if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, like, you're still eating alive things. Like, where you draw that line doesn't really matter. Like, you have to consume other life to beget more life, and that's just the nature of it. And some of that is depressing, but I think that's possibly a bit of cultural relativism. Thinking that we can survive by being completely peaceful, and it's a good ideal, and I think we should strive for it, especially within human to human interaction. Like, we're smart enough to know better, and we're smart enough to figure it out and to be able to have a good community and have a good society that helps guide each other towards a better place. But it's not going to last forever.
Let's get some questions. What do we have left in the comment roll?
Stacy asks, for meditation beginners, what are some tips for clearing your mind? I seem to just start worrying about everything once I try to take a moment.
I was practicing that this morning actually.
Yeah?
It's a very difficult.
I'm grinning because
I know
my answer is going to be very different from yours.
So a lot of people ask the question, well, how do I get this little voice in my head to shut up? And the short answer is you can't.
Yeah, you can't.
So it sucks for you. But it's okay. I'm good with that.
Right.
But I do have a practice that I go through that involves a little bit of breath work, a little bit of movement, keeping my body healthy, keeping my thoughts healthy by choosing what I focus my attention on consciously rather than mindlessly scrolling through things that are hitting me left and right or watching television where people are constantly pumping content into my attention's view. I am more likely to make the choice of what I view and what I don't view, and I take care of myself. And I'm also creating a lot. I consider myself to be an artist. I consider myself to be an entrepreneur, and even working on this podcast and this business venture that we have going on together keeps my mind sharp and fresh, and doesn't leave a lot of room for the negativity and the things that I don't want in there. And I find that the more that I allow myself to obsess over the things that I really want to accomplish or the things that I want to focus on, the more that the automatic thought processes in my mind will align with what I'm putting my attention on.
Well, Stacy, I would suggest that one, like Brian said, you can't really stop your mind from doing its thing. It's supposed to have thoughts. It's supposed to notice things. Really, for me, when I teach my meditation students, I teach them that if you think of your consciousness like a flashlight, and you can widen that beam or narrow that beam, and you can choose what to focus on. Say you choose your breath, which is what most meditators start with. When your mind gets distracted from the thing that you're looking at, the thing that you're observing, it gets pulled away, and then you start thinking about something else. Every time that happens, remind yourself, I have a task. I need to observe my object, observe my breath, and then you just keep pulling it back to the breath. You're going to get distracted. That's fine. It's a skill. The more you practice pulling your mind back to the thing you want to focus on, the better you get at it. And the tighter you're able to keep your focus, the less things start to distract you. And some days are better than others. Some days you're going to get distracted very easily, and some days you're going to sit and focus, and it's going to come easily. But if it doesn't, don't freak out. Don't worry about it. I want you to think of meditation like watching an ant crawl across the floor. You don't make any judgments about it. You just watch it. You observe it. And that's really what you're doing when you meditate. You're not trying to stop the thoughts. You're just observing what happens and allowing yourself to calm down and calm down and calm down. Let the thoughts settle like mud and water. Just kind of let that sediment float to the bottom, and just allow yourself that moment of not needing to do anything about the things that you notice. You can notice the thoughts, let them come in, but you don't have to do anything about it. You don't have to make any judgment at all. You can just see it, recognize that it's there, and keep watching your breath. Stay with your object. And sometimes you just need to get off the couch and go do something else and come back to it later. It's a skill. You'll get better.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about the two concepts that you'll hear meditators talk about. One is non-judgment, and the other is staying in the present moment. So what Corey is speaking about is the process of non-judgment, just simply observing your thoughts and just noticing what's there, what patterns are there, what continues to recur for you, and staying present, which is just to be there without judging or analyzing or thinking about or daydreaming. And if all of that stuff happens, great. But the invitation is not to roll into it. It's just to allow the thoughts to happen, and then when you notice them, you just kind of let them go. And there is a pitfall that people fall into in this process, which is, let's say you end up with a negative thought, or you start worrying about something you have to do later, or you're thinking about something that somebody said to you in the recent past that really bothers you. You're going to feel some stuff, and it's not going to be pleasant. There's still emotions that comes along with the thoughts that automatically pass through the mind. And so the other trick is, as you're observing the thoughts and they begin to trigger certain emotions in the body, to also observe the emotions in the body as though they don't mean anything. Just notice what anxiety feels like. Notice what anger feels like. Notice what sadness feels like.
Your thoughts and your emotions are things that happen to you. We tend to think of ourselves as having lots of control, and you don't really. There's very few things you actually have control over. Your thoughts and your emotions are not. They're not really things you have control over. In the same, you have control over them in the same way you have control over your breath. Most of the time, it happens on its own. But when you want to, and if you have the discipline to, you can take it off autopilot and force yourself to breathe, or force yourself to think about something, or force yourself to feel a certain way. It's possible, but the default setting is it's on autopilot. So if you allow it to be on autopilot, just notice and recognize that you don't have a sense of control. And not having that sense of control is very liberating. It allows you to not worry so much, because there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, it can be scary.
Right.
And once we get past the fear of it and realize, wow, I'm actually not going to die if I continue sitting here and observing, it becomes extremely liberating to learn for the first time that I am not my thoughts.
Great.
And I am not my emotions.
Yes.
These are just things that I can observe.
You are more your microbiome than you are any of those things.
Yeah.
Because 50% of your body mass is made up by things that are not you.
Yeah.
Those little creepy crawly things, those little bacteria.
Bacteria, E. coli.
Yeah.
Yum.
You should think about those things.
Yep. And those things are not you either. So we can get past that.
Yeah. So let's go on. We got a couple more questions.
Sure.
So Noelle Taz is my stepsister. She threw in a question. She says, how do I meditate and not fall asleep? Please tell the other voices in my head.
Okay. Well, Noelle, that requires you to listen in addition to the voices in your head, so I hope you're paying attention.
All right. Remember that meditation is an active activity. It's not passive. Now, you physically might be sitting still, but that's not the only way to meditate. You can meditate by walking, by standing, by lying. You can meditate through a flow activity such as dancing or video games or something. But if you're going to do the classic, zazen sitting meditation, don't allow yourself to just relax. You want to be slightly uncomfortable. Whatever your posture is, make it nice and straight if that helps. And then you have, because there's a little bit of discomfort involved in the way that you sit, you can use that to help you keep focused. Use it to help you keep awake. Because if you just do the normal thing you normally do and you start to fall asleep, it's because you are passively engaging with your breath and with the observation of your object. If you make it a more active thing, don't allow your breath to get so shallow. Keep it a little more active. Don't let yourself calm down so much if you're having trouble falling asleep. Stay a little bit more upright. You can also do walking meditation before you do sitting meditation. So your heart rate is going a little bit more by the time when you sit, and it'll take you longer to start to nod off. And then, active engagement.
If you do choose to engage in walking meditation, I would invite you to really slow down the pace of walk, almost as though you're walking in slow motion, so that you can really feel all of the nuances of the micro decisions that your muscles are making in order to keep you balanced, to be able to feel the weight shifting as you move from one leg to the other.
Yeah, the Theravada Buddhism uses this slow walking technique a lot, and it's kind of a flow meditation state. I'm sorry, it's a focus meditation state. Yeah, paying attention to all the little differences. But in Zen meditation, Zen walking meditation, is actually quite fast. You walk quite a lot faster than you normally would. You swing your arms more than you normally would. You stride farther than you normally would. And all of that is a little bit discomforting, and it gets your heart rate going a lot. And that's a flow meditative state where you are not so much observing any one thing, but going with the flow. Like literally what it means is like being in a river and trying to just maintain that sense of flow. And that's a very different style. And so if you... Brian recommends the slow walking meditation. If you're having trouble falling asleep, I would recommend the fast one.
Yeah, go with that.
And then go have your sit.
Yeah, one of the biggest misconceptions about meditation that I hear a lot from people is that, meditation is supposed to be relaxing, right? I'm supposed to do this to de-stress from my day. And
I thought it was supposed to give me superpowers.
Well, yeah, that's
why I got into it.
Kind of does that a little bit. Meditation, the intention behind meditation is not necessarily to relax or to de-stress, although those things happen to be byproducts of the practice of meditation. Usually the intention of a meditation is to focus and concentrate the mind, and it is, like Corey mentioned, a very active process, and it's work. It is something that you do. It's like going to the gym, but for your mind. And every time that you notice that you get distracted and you come back to your object of focus, it's almost like doing a bicep curl. The muscle fibers of your brain are being stretched and torn, and then eventually they get stronger and they get rewired differently, so that the next time you're just sitting by yourself, those automatic thoughts and judgments that you don't want to have appear in your mind suddenly lower their volume. But the intention is not to lower their volume at the beginning. One of the biggest traps of meditation for beginners is when they get into it, they want to de-stress or they want to quiet the mind. And when we sit with the resistance to those things actually get stronger. We get more stressed and we get louder voices in our heads because we begin to panic that we're not getting the results that we want immediately.
It's a bit counterintuitive sometimes with meditation because a lot of people go into it looking for the results, and then if you seek out those results, you don't get them. And it's one of those things where it only happens when you're not thinking about it, when you're not trying. It's kind of like you said with the bicep curl, like opening and closing your fist. How do you do that? You have no idea, right? you can make up some scientific example. Well, the neurons in my brain fire, and then it triggers the muscle to twitch, and then it triggers the tendon and triggers the bone. And yeah, but you couldn't explain that to me in enough detail with as much time there is in the rest of the universe in words where you could just open and close your hand. Yeah. You could just do it, and that is one of the kind of non-intuitive things that come out of meditative practice, is that it works a lot better if you don't try and you just do it.
Yeah, and then going back to surprise from earlier.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, going back to surprise, really allow yourself to be surprised by all of the benefits that you experience as a result of just doing the practice.
All right. We'll do 2 more quick questions. Okay. We'll do a quick one, and then we've got a difficult one. We'll end with the difficult one. Okay. All right. So Brian, what's bliss? Brian Kerr wants to know. Dissect bliss.
Oh my goodness.
I'm going to give you 30 seconds to explain to me what bliss is. Go.
Bliss is the absence of judgment and thought and the rational mind, such that the creative aspect of the self becomes fully expressed, and there becomes such an overwhelming sense of pleasure and connectedness with all of existence that we simply can no longer control the physical body, and we become an emotional conduit of awesomeness.
Okay.
How's that?
I completely disagree.
Okay, fine. Yeah, go for it.
I don't know.
Right.
I mean, that's how I'll disagree. So I don't really know what bliss is. I think bliss is is I get a bit of an invented tradition. Like, I mean, it's one thing to have a physical sensation of pleasure. It's another thing to have almost, an orgasmic euphoria of pleasure. And some people might take mind-altering substances or sex or, some sort of jumping out of an airplane or some highly emotional, pleasurable sensation is how I would define bliss. But I think that feeling, and this is why I say I don't know, is that I think that feeling is unique for every individual.
Yeah.
And that some experiences are not going to be cross-communicated in a way that's understandable for everybody. He continues his question by asking, how might we cultivate bliss? And for me, my answer to that is, if you want to be happy, if you want this good thing, you have to be okay with the bad things. You have to be okay. You have to learn to love the boring parts of life. Learn to love the uncomfortable parts and the painful parts, because you can't have a chess game where white always wins.
Yeah, and if I could answer that question also, how might we cultivate bliss? I have 2 words for you, Brian. It's vegan donuts.
Where might one get those vegan donuts?
There are about 7 different places around the continental United States where they could be found, I'm
starting a new religion. Vegan donuts are now sacrilegious. That's the only tenet of the religion.
Look,
they have to be covered in animal fat and grease and sugar.
I don't disagree with you on the sugar part.
Okay. Last question. Well, this is a tough one, especially considering the what our plans are.
Yep.
So Kunal asks. Kunal is actually a DJ at WVUM, The Voice, the University of Miami radio station. He plays a show on Thursday nights called Electric Kingdom Live.
Quick plug.
Nice. His show is great. Thanks, Kunal, for writing in, and I will continue to listen to your show, only on the condition that you listen to ours. So Kunal asks, what are your thoughts on mindfulness business? Apps like Headspace, mindfulness gyms, mindfulness coaching, and the monetizing of mindfulness in general. In tech, especially, people are making platforms like this that teach people mindfulness, but they need people to continue using their platforms to keep making money. So it's not in their best interest to teach people enough that they no longer need the platform. So I guess I'm curious about the conflict of incentives there, spreading mindfulness practice versus making a profit.
I don't think that the 2 things are mutually exclusive from one another.
No, but this does cut close to home, because we have plans to do this very thing and monetize what we're teaching. Right now, obviously, this podcast is free and will remain free, but in the future, we plan on doing other projects. So how do you reconcile this? What are your thoughts?
The way that I see it is, look, if you're really going to teach somebody, a real teacher empowers people to take on the practice on their own. We provide the avenues for people to learn. We provide some guidance and some information, but it's up to people to take on their own practice and their own study and to incorporate or integrate that into their lifestyle. And if, let's say, a platform or an application is designed such that it empowers people to take off on their own, that's great, and that should be monetized. And if there's a platform that makes people dependent on the platform for their continued practice, I don't agree that that's a proper way to teach, but that should also be monetized, because in some small way it is helping people and it is making a difference, and it may be guiding people in the direction of beginning to be self-reliant in their own practice.
Yeah, I would agree mostly. I think that a good teacher makes themselves progressively useless. I really don't believe that teaching is a thing. Like the verb to teach. I don't believe that it really exists. I think that the only verb that really matters is to learn. because, much like the adage says, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And I can show you all the best knowledge in the world. I can show you where the best books are. I can direct you to the best teachers. I can point at in Zen, they say Zen is a finger pointing at the moon. And if I point at the moon in the best way humanly possible, if you look at my finger, you're missing the point. And there's nothing the teacher can do about that. I can continue to point at a different way at the moon, or continue to point over and over and over again until it gets through the student's thick head. But if they don't want to engage with the material, they can't. It's not going to happen. And so mindfulness companies that get into this, obviously we live in a society that requires you to use money. And I'm not personally a fan of that system, but it's the one we've got, and you have to live in it. So as a mindfulness teacher, as a meditation and martial arts instructor, many of the things that I teach are things that can be learned on the go. It can be learned by yourself. You can become an autodidactic, and you can teach yourself these things. But the truth is that many people, many students, still labor under the delusion that they need a teacher. And so I'll be the first to tell you that you don't need me, but I have a skill, and I'm kind of good at teaching. Some people are not good at teaching. Some people aren't good at explaining things in a way that's easily understood. For me, I just think about what I wish someone had told me when I was learning and say that. And yeah, you bring up the point about a conflict of incentives, making a profit versus spreading mindfulness. Now, yeah, you don't need to buy anything to learn and practice mindfulness. The concepts are there. I mean, you might want to buy some books and read up on the subject and have some conversations with people, but if you think you need a teacher, you do. Just like in the same way that if you think you need psychological counseling, then you do. And that's fine, and there's nothing wrong with that, and you should. And you should seek out teachers when you need them, but not everybody does. But if a student is willing to help support me in my contributions to society by teaching something that really can't be taught, if that's worth it to the student, then I will gladly accept that donation, because I need to eat too. So I don't feel bad at all about starting a tech company or mindfulness company that teaches something that's free and monetizing something that is there, because there's plenty of people out there who won't go out of their way to learn it, and they think they need a teacher, and if they think they need me, I am more than happy to extend my services.
So if you like what we're teaching now, we're going to have an even more focused, concentrated, and disciplined platform available, whereby you will get to learn all of the things that we know and that those in our network love to teach. And it will be set up in such a way to where you will not be dependent on the platform for your own lifestyle success. So more to come.
Great, yes. Well, we'd like to thank you for listening to Mindfulness of Doom. This episode is sponsored by Game Genie. Game Genie, ruining games since 1999.
1990, actually. 9 years prior to
Oh, my goodness, you're right, 1990.
It's 1990.
We've gotten so old.
We were a very small child.
We are so old. This podcast is also brought to you by Mass Extinction.
Signaling the end of our species.
The end of the species is coming.
Really, it's and this has been, mass extinction has been an idea and a concept in the minds of man for as long as most major world religions can remember. And we could probably do an entire podcast episode simply on the concept of mass extinction.
We probably will. This podcast is also sponsored by cat poop.
Yep, cat poop. Gets all over your hands, gets all over your body, it gets in your shower, it gets in your bed sheets, it gets on your floor, it stays out of the litter box where it belongs, and it smells terrible.
Cat poop, teaching us about humility since
like this
the dawn of cats.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much for enjoying Mindfulness of Doom, and we will see you next time.
Peace. We invite you to like, subscribe, and rate our podcasts on Apple Podcasts or wherever. Have suggestions, music, or artwork for the show? Want to sponsor our podcast? Find our contact page and links to the items we talked about in this episode at www.mindfulnessofdoom.com. Become a supporter of our podcast at patreon.com/mindfulnessofdoom and get access to exclusive content that's not on the show.
This podcast is recorded in Miami, Florida. It is written, recorded, and edited by Brian Lemmerman and Corey Hardacre. Our music is provided by Pallet Town and Suitcase Music. They can be found at soundcloud.com/pallettown and at suitcasemusic.bandcamp.com. All poorly thought out opinions are ours. Nothing you hear in this podcast should be construed as professional medical advice. Go see a therapist, all of you.
Self-discovery has no end, so you can pick any place to begin. The path of self-discovery